everybody, and welcome to Megashift today. My name is Rob Kleiman, editor of Megashift, and I'm joined here with Arielle Nissenblatt of Earbuds.Audio and Pinwheel, a podcast industry veteran and really a mover and shaker in this field of podcasting. So we're really thrilled to have you today. Arielle, how are you doing?
I'm spectacular now that I found out we're neighbors, and in the background of our conversation today, when we hear the ambulance, at least it will be the same ambulance.
That's true. That's true. We are Brooklyn through and through. We're both Brooklyn based and met a couple years back through different communities intersecting. And we've really had an awesome career trajectory and built a really interesting niche in this podcasting space. So I'd love to learn a bit more about what you're working on. And so you have a project called Earbuds.Audio you've been working on, and then professionally you're working with Pinwheel for is your day job. So I'd love to get a sense of how you're spending your time, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how Earbuds.Audio is making trends.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. When we met, which was 2019, I remember that I talked about podcasts a lot. This was like a peer retreat that we went on. And I talked about podcasts so much, in fact, that we had an arts and crafts segment of the weekend, and somebody painted, I think we were painting mugs for each other. And somebody painted a mug for me that said podcast queen. So very predictive of where we are today. And also humbling to know that I was talking about podcasts so much then and now. Yeah. So I've been working in podcasting since 2017. I started with a podcast recommendation newsletter that I still write every Sunday. And I've used that newsletter to get into all sorts of different aspects of the podcast industry, which has now very much shifted to more of a broader content scope. I help a lot of people who are interested in making podcasts make podcasts, but often that means at this point making video shows or using the podcast to then create derivative content that they can post on social media or wherever else their audiences are clamoring for, or their potential audiences might be clamoring for. I have, since starting Earbuds, worked at a podcast listening app. I've done marketing for clients on the side, usually through my own endeavors, where I work with them to figure out who their audience is and then where to find that audience. I have produced podcasts. That's a lot of what I'm doing right now. I worked for software companies for a while on the creator side. I worked for a remote recording platform called Squadcast as the community manager, which then got acquired by Descript. Descript can be pronounced both ways, which is an editing software that also does a whole bunch of other things at this point. It's transcript-based editing, which is really innovative and helps a lot of creators become more versed in editing their own projects. And for the last year and some, I've been working at a company called Pinwheel, where I help creators or would-be creators or soon-to-be creators use podcasts to reach audiences that they want to reach, laddering up to a goal within their businesses.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And it's when you explain that, I think of this Venn diagram. You have the creator cottage industry, and then there's the AV side of it and capturing the content and the editing side. So you really sat at the nexus of this really exciting, this maturing industry. Everybody has a podcast now, including myself and including you.
Yeah.
And
but you have for a while. So
yes, that's right. I started it in 2016 and we're picking up the pace here. What I'd really like to double click on today is your work around Earbuds.Audio. And right now, folks are finding podcasts in new ways, fueled by some of these platforms, whether it's Spotify or Substack or different recommendation engines that are AI fueled, right? But you bring that human element, you doing that curatorial type of expertise in an era where algorithms are deciding what we're listening to. You're bringing that humanity back to discovery. So when you launched Earbuds.Audio in 2017, it's a weekly theme playlist that is powered by listeners. Folks can submit. And it's a lo-fi but well-oiled recommendation engine powered on people's preferences and taste, but with the machine in personalization. And so, yeah, like as we wade through that, when you started Earbuds.Audio and you wanted to have this crowdsourced element, like what question were you trying to answer? What was interesting and what sparked the idea?
I love this question also because as you are prompting me with these questions, you're referring to the project as Earbuds.Audio, which I love. And I'm legitimately thinking of changing because changing the name from Earbuds Podcast Collective, which nobody really knows what that means, to Earbuds.Audio. So without meaning to right now, you're doing some rebranding for me, and I'm going to refer to it as that. It's much more descriptive. As you said, Earbuds.Audio is a podcast recommendation engine that really is a newsletter, but has since created a bunch of spin-off related entities that are all in service of helping people find their next favorite podcast / also helping creators find their audience. And the reason I started it, the question I was trying to answer was, there are so many podcasts out there. How do you choose what's worth your time? And I was living in LA at the time that I had the idea for this newsletter. I was listening to podcasts, but I was listening to the same 4 or 5 podcasts every week. And while I loved them and felt like my brain was expanding and I felt occupied during traffic, all that stuff, all of the benefits of listening to podcasts, I wanted to listen to more podcasts. And I had the idea that if I have my 5 favorite, if I had my 5 favorite podcasts, you probably had yours, your friends probably have theirs. The network effect is huge. And we could all be exposed to these pre-vetted podcasts that our friends love or friends of friends. And initially what I did was I created a survey on SurveyMonkey because I had heard of SurveyMonkey through podcasts. My entire life revolves around podcasts in one way or another, whether it's like the merch that I wear. A lot of my wardrobe is purchased from ads, or a lot of the software that I use has been purchased from ads on podcasts. So I used SurveyMonkey to create a survey, which had no real methodology to it. It was really vibes-based surveying. And I asked a few questions. One was, do you already listen to podcasts? A few more. I asked, what podcasts do you listen to? When you're listening, what do you tend to be doing? Do you want more podcasts to listen to? And most importantly, do you want to have a leadership role within whatever this becomes? And what my idea there was, do you want to curate a list? Initially, what I wanted to do was put out these lists and then have some sort of discussion about the weekly podcast recommendations. That did not pan out. And over the years, I've learned that it's really hard to get people to attend book clubs about podcasts. And I'll get into that. There's an organization called Podcast Brunch Club that I've been involved with to varying degrees over the years. And I also, last night at the Brooklyn Public Library, you'd probably be interested in this, I lead with my friend Amanda McLaughlin, who runs a company called Multitude Productions. We co-lead a podcast book club at the library where each month there's a theme and people come to discuss the podcast within that theme. The question I was looking to answer is, there are so many podcasts out there. How do you choose what's worth your time? And over time, that survey developed into what's now a weekly podcast recommendation newsletter that is curated by a different person each week on any theme. Anyone can curate a list. There's no requirement that you have to have a podcast or that you have to have a certain number of followers. Literally anybody can curate a list on anything. And if they have a podcast or they're involved with a podcast, they can include one of their own episodes as part of that. Recently, as of about 2 months ago, I've started spin-off newsletters. So now I also put out a weekly history podcast recommendation newsletter, kids content, true crime, and sports. And I'm going to add more to those as people start asking or telling me that they're interested in certain topics.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And it's almost like, it makes me think of like BuzzFeed list, right? And that crowdsourced element is like what there's heart in it. And that's what's unique, I think, really cool about the idea. It's almost like, to some extent, like community can't be automated, right? And so like how to really get that authenticity in your community and in the content being shared.
I've seen a lot of things pop up over the years that at first really freaked me out. I was trying to carve my space as a podcast recommendation expert, engine conductor or whatever. And every once in a while, Twitter accounts would pop up promising that they were going to bring podcast recommendations, or other newsletters have popped up over the years that have had similar missions. And there are some newsletters that are definitely complementary, and I can get into that I'm friendly with. I now run a Slack channel for podcast related newsletters. But Anybody who has tried to automate the experience has had a short-lived run. And I think that's the case because getting podcast recommendations is already such a word of mouth experience that even trying to make it a newsletter is difficult. But at least I think what the newsletter does is it exposes people to titles of podcasts that they might be interested. Cover art, as you're scanning through, that cover art looks interesting to me. Let me zoom in a little bit further with my own eyeballs and decide that I like the description of that podcast. Let me listen to it. And then even subconsciously, talking to a friend over coffee, I saw this podcast title that I think I'm going to check out, or I did listen to it and I think you would be interested too. So it is very much still a word of mouth recommendation experience getting podcasts to listen to, but at least the newsletter, I think, prompts people a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your role as curator and in enabling folks to make lists, like how do you know when a set of recommendations feels right? Is it instinct? Is it just our human desire to
Yeah.
want to hear story? Or is it something else? Like how do you bring that curatorial, like editorial lens to all the different lists people
Yeah.
bring?
When I first started, I was taking anything because I thought there was inherent value in this is somebody's favorite podcast. Let's put them out into the world. And I do think that's true. Purely just to see what people are finding and what people are enjoying and how they group things together. However, I have over the years learned to curate a bit more thoroughly. And the reason for that is because early on, I realized I had to set some editorial standards. I had a form that people could fill out. It used to be super fly by the seat of my pants how I would find curators, how I would invite them to curate. It was really manual. Everything I did was a million different emails, a lot of back and forth to try to figure out how to get this newsletter out. Over the years, I've automated it to an extent in the sense that like now I have a form on my website. And when that form gets filled out, I get a notification. I can then check out that list that somebody's curated, and I can then decide if I want to get in touch with them if I have more questions. But most of the time, because of the way that I've worded the submission form, people know that I'm going to review their list and I'll get in touch if I have any questions, and it will be featured or it won't. We get a lot of submissions, so I can't feature all of them. Every once in a while, I need to know more, or maybe they put 2 of their own podcasts and I need them to only choose one. So I'm reaching out to let them know that they need to select another one. But over time, it really has come together. But initially, like I was saying, I was taking anything and I had somebody submit a list that was like the best interview podcast out there. And this was 2017. And all of the podcasts that were featured were by white men interviewing white men. And I was like, you know what? There's inherent value to putting this out. And somebody wrote back to me and was like, almost word for word, I remember what they said because it was like, it imprinted on me. It was like so painfully true. It was like, surely all of the best podcasts are not the white men interviewing white men. And I was like, not only is that true, it's also up to me to do a little bit more deciding for people and helping people, if they trust me as a curator, trust my word. And I wrote back and I basically fell on my sword and I was like, you're so right. Thank you for letting me know. And I reached out to a mentor and I was like, what's my role here? What's my responsibility here as the curator of this? And how do I take responsibility and how do I make sure that I write in my submission form in the future wording that helps this not happen again? And so now if you check out my submission form, it says there's basically a diversity requirement. And yes, of course, people are going to be rolling their eyes. Is this DEI again? And you know what? Maybe it is, but I genuinely think that helps us find more podcasts that we would not find on our own. And it might challenge some curators to find things that are outside of their comfort zone, which will in turn make their way onto the brain palettes of people who might need to hear those new things. So that was an early mistake that I made when it comes to I underestimated my role as a curator. And nowadays, I do a lot more thinking when I get a submission. And sometimes I'll even shape it a little bit more. Like maybe they'll submit a list that's like spooky podcasts. So I'll say spooky podcast for Halloween. Hey, can I run that around October? So I do a little bit more personalization to the specific time on the calendar as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that editorial angle and the editorial calendar makes a lot of sense. And also, as you mentioned, like highlighting those voices that are diverse or provide different views, different peeks into different people's experience, which I think is one of the really unique, cool things about podcasts is like putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes or thinking about how somebody else approached a problem or built a business or cooks their dinner or makes comedy, right? There's a million and one new topics that could be explored. And similarly with Megashift, like I could just bring on white founders and men and keep that
Valuable.
diverse. Yeah, it is. Yeah, there's valuable. But I think, as you mentioned, like having the
I think it's foresight.
it's foresight yeah. So all that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned that you are starting a couple spin-offs like history and you named a few others. And is this a diversification that kind of is from your data? Are you seeing it like some interesting surprises in the data as to what people are interested in, or is it just like any content company are just hitting those main verticals, or are you seeing some interesting behavior that's driving some of this?
Over the years, it has been suggested to me, and I've seen through the data that people might come to the podcast newsletter because they see a specific list. Best podcasts of 2025 on true crime, or sometimes the curation will be like, here are the podcasts that made me laugh out loud. And then the next week they get a completely different theme. So they've subscribed for one reason, but then get something completely different. And initially when I started the newsletter, I was like, I want people who are in it for whatever comes their way. But naturally, the people that consume the thing are going to be the ones inherently or on purpose dictating what they desire, what they want to see, what they want to read, what they want to click on. And I realized over time that the reason the newsletter might not have 100,000 subscribers like I believe it should is because there is a limitation. There are not that many people who are down to receive a newsletter every single week that brings them a different theme and 5 podcast episodes on that theme. You have to be okay with seeing that theme and saying, okay, you know what, this week's list is not for me. Or one of these episodes might be interesting, but I'm going to delete this one without even opening it. That will probably happen a lot of the time, which affects my open rate, my click rate, and ultimately what I can charge for sponsorship in order to keep this thing going. So the idea to bring on, or the idea to start these spin-off newsletters is, let me see if one of these topic specific newsletters really hits and that people want to follow the latest in sports, because first of all, sports podcasts seem to be booming. Sports media seems to be booming, especially I think because media is definitely diversifying and journalism is diversifying. And there's a lot of independent outlets nowadays. True crime, obviously, no secret that it's extremely popular. So a newsletter on that, what would that look like? Weirdly, the newsletter that has been the most successful so far, maybe not weirdly, if you are in this world, is the kids content newsletter. A lot of parents seem to be moving away from screens for their kids whenever possible. And because of that, podcasts are a pretty great alternative. They're looking for new things to discover. And there's a lot of really great kids content creators that are extremely active in the podcast space. So that's really the thinking behind these spin-off newsletters. And it's very early. So I will reassess at 6 months and decide how to continue. Maybe that means dropping one of them in favor of spending more time and resources on another, or starting to put some dollars behind the promotion of one of them.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And with this being the Megashift podcast, thinking about like the macro trends and what you just shared, it's a classic platform problem. It's like, how do we be big enough where we can afford to personalize without turning off people who are really niche interests? Or how do we provide niche content while being a general platform? And if we're general, how do we drill down and provide that personalization? So I can't remember exactly which VC venture capitalist it was back in the day that like was he said, do things that don't scale. It's like one of those
Yes.
common adages. And so you're toying with that and trying to operationalize that, which sounds really interesting. I think, yeah, similarly, I cover different topics on Megashift, and it's like, maybe people don't want to learn about quantum. Maybe they want to learn about podcasting, or maybe they want to learn about this. That. So it's an interesting thing, I think, as a creator, particularly in your curatorial role, and of course, like role to create something that sustains income wise, testing those things out. So it's really admirable and cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so, like, looking at the way you divide your time, so effectively Earbuds.Audio, new name, is like a side hustle, but takes definitely a labor of love. So professionally, what are you doing, like, as your role with Pinwheel and previously Audily? Like, how do all these pieces fit together?
Yeah, so Audily is technically the company above Pinwheel. So I am theoretically under Audily, but Pinwheel is its own, another spinoff, Pinwheel spinoff. There's definitely something there. And with Pinwheel, so I was lucky enough to launch Pinwheel, which initially is still diversion from one of the other companies within the Audily umbrella. Rococo Punch is another company that makes audio, very high quality audio, usually investigative, usually highly reported, more expensive on the production side of things, shows that take a long time to research and put together and are inherently different from the shows that I make, which are more chat focused. They require prep, but the prep is more outlining rather than scripting. And so I'm working with solo entrepreneurs who want to have a podcast so that they can talk to people in their industry, whether it's peers or people that they want as clients or people that are already part of their memberships that they want to highlight so that they keep their members happy, things like that, or because the members genuinely bring something to the table that other people could learn from. So I talk to a lot of solo entrepreneurs who make shows like that they can then redistribute as clips on social media or on LinkedIn, and then use some of that content to create written posts on LinkedIn. So that's one of the kind of groups of people that I work with. And then I also work with anybody who wants to have a chat show or a conversational based show. That the thread that runs with all of my clients is they make a show for the purpose of laddering up to a larger mission or goal. And I hope actually that most podcasts do that, but a lot of them don't know to do that. So often when I'm speaking with potential clients who say, I want to start a podcast because I was told I should have a podcast or because I just want to have a podcast, I'll say, okay, but why? Sometimes I'm very honest with people that a podcast might not be right for them, or an ongoing podcast might not be right for them if their goal is straight up downloads. But if their goal is to become more well-known on LinkedIn in their niche, or to have a body of work to point to, or to add it to their website so that when people come across their website, they have this body of work that they can point to, which showcases their interviewing skills and things like that, then that's great. I think that's a great reason to make a podcast. And yeah, so my goal is to work with people on figuring out what those goals and missions are for this piece of content that might start as audio, but also involve video, also involve written posts and things like that.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's such a blossoming industry. Like, we ran into each other at Advertising Week here in New York, and there's a lot of money pouring into podcasts. I know some articles just went out that Netflix is looking to license video content. Obviously, the Joe Rogans of the world had those big engagements with Spotify. It's certainly a really exciting time in the industry, and there's like influencer agencies. It's a huge burgeoning business. So it's really cool that that's.
I feel like it must be said that a few years ago, it seemed to be more burgeoning, and there were a lot of deals, like you mentioned, Joe Rogan with Spotify, tons of other creators essentially being given podcasts, if that language makes sense. That's how I think about it in my head. Is Spotify had a lot of money to say, let's rock this experiment with podcasts, give creators podcasts. And often at the time they were audio only. And often they were giving podcasts. Often they were signing deals with creators who were TikTok / short form first, which I believe did not super translate very well to long form, because those people are used to making short form. Maybe they can shift and extrapolate their content to be fit for long form, but often their listeners, the people that follow them, maybe aren't even listeners. They're people that want to scroll TikTok. And also they're used to consuming the information that these influencers, these creators make in 45-second clips. So I think Spotify and other content studios that were doing these deals thought about that, but maybe had higher hopes for the conversion. And there is still money in podcasting, but I really think it long term is in the independent creator.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And yeah, where right now are you seeing like a lot of energy and movement in the space? I think you just spoke to a little bit, but could you double click on that? Like, where do you feel like the dollars are going? Where do you feel like the excitement is going?
It's interesting, this move that Netflix is making, and so are some other streaming services, to license podcasts, I think is a really interesting move, because I do a lot of informal audience surveys. Ultimately, the theory is I'm not going to be the one to dictate how consumers are consuming. I am a consumer myself. I listen to about 5 hours of podcasts a day. I love listening. It's my favorite way of learning, of being entertained, all of the stuff that podcasts are great for. But I'm not the average listener, because I'm super tapped into the creator side, the monetization side, the distribution side, a lot going on there. I therefore am aware that the people are going to dictate. The people who are listening are going to dictate. The people who have zero desire to make a podcast are going to dictate. And because of that, I believe that sometimes the moves made by these larger companies don't take into account what the listener or what the consumer is doing while they're listening. I often try to ask my clients before I work with them, when they're thinking about audience development, what are you doing when you listen to podcasts? Or do you listen to podcasts? But that's a story for another day. What are you doing when you listen to podcasts? Are you watching? Are you sitting? Are you scrolling while you have it on in the background? Are you going for a walk? Are you doing the dishes? A million different things. Are you driving a car? And I think with video, people might be watching because it's a TV show if it's highly produced and there's some elements that are being referred to visually. Maybe there's charts that people want to talk about, or maybe if it's a pop culture show, they're showing images of people. And we can have another debate of whether or not that's a podcast. But again, I still say that the consumer dictates. And if they call it a podcast, who am I to say it's not a podcast? We can get into that. My views on that have changed over the years. This is Tangent City. I will go back and say, ultimately, the people are the ones who are going to dictate the terms that we use and the way that we consume the things. So these larger companies that are making these decisions about how we consume, I don't know if they're doing it based on data or based on we want to beat YouTube. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's, as you mentioned, like it's effectively a talk show. It's okay. Maybe somebody will just watch like a highly produced or informal conversation on their screen during the morning coffee instead of like CBS morning show or 60 Minutes. Like, obviously, I don't want to age myself. Yeah, it's just if it's going to be consumed on a screen, like it's a totally different experience than listening while cleaning or driving. And yeah, I think there's like a modality like video, audio, or maybe it's like they're transitioning between the video and then they're like get in their car and they can keep it on. Yeah, it's just interesting. It's like these companies want to be embedded in every kind of minute of our lives, and 5 hours a day is quite a bit of consumption there. What's your like go-to player?
Thank you for asking. I love getting into the specifics. I just want to go back on one thing that you said and double click, triple click, mega click.
Megashift.
The idea,
there we go.
The idea that people might discover a podcast via a well-placed clip or a really engaging clip on their social media feed of choice. And they might say, okay, in a really great scenario, they might say, I want to discover more from that creator. I'm going to click on their profile. In a really great scenario, they then might click on the link in the bio. In a really great scenario, they then might go to the podcast or to the video. All I'm saying is often social media doesn't translate to people consuming the thing on the whole. But say they do watch a podcast, say they do go to YouTube and search for their favorite creator. Amy Poehler is huge right now, both audio only and the video podcast. I still believe, based on informal conversations, anecdotes that I've been having when I talk to people about their podcast listening habits, or consumption habits, I'll say, because it's not always listening, that people are putting it on and glancing and looking away and doing their things. Mostly because a lot of these shows, I'm putting the shows in quotes for the people that are listening, they're not as visually stimulating as a series on Apple TV Plus or on Netflix, or something that was made for TV first, for eyes first. So while you might like to look at the people that you consume their content, I think what these shows allow us to do is to also go about our day. You're still taking it with you. And the eyeballs are great when they happen, but still the podcast is the place, or still the audio experience is the one that creates that intimate experience that people love to refer to when they're thinking about podcasts. Now, you asked me about where I listen. I use Pocket Casts to listen. When I first started listening to podcasts, I used Apple, I'm sure, just because that was what was there. I dabble, though, at this point in everything because I like to keep up with the changes to the software, but also what's being featured editorially. Of course, there's the algorithmic lists that are generated based on who's getting the most followers that day, or did this person get a spike because they had Michelle Obama on the show. But I love logging in every week to Apple Podcasts on Monday because that's when they update their homepage editorial slate. Spotify does it on Wednesdays. And then YouTube now has a podcast presence that's more dedicated to podcasts. They have a homepage for podcasts. And all of those places have curators that are behind the scenes figuring out what to platform. And that's an interesting experience also because creators can pitch to be featured in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love that you have it down to the day. Was that kind of just trial and error? Or do they publish that somewhere? Or
I'm friendly with a bunch of the curators just from going to conferences, and it's maybe something that I noticed, but also because I have over the years successfully pitched clients of mine to be featured on Apple Podcasts, which is a great way for them to get in front of people that might love them, some people that might give them 2-star reviews, some people that might leave nasty comments, but ultimately get them in front of people who may or may not want to listen to more of their show.
very cool.
Yeah, so I have noticed those trends over the years, and they changed, but yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned Pocket Cast. I too use Pocket Cast. And what
Yay.
I really appreciate about that is, in addition to just like the features and the app itself, it's owned by the same company that owns WordPress, like Automatic. And so they have WordPress and they own a journaling app and called Day One. I'm not sponsored yet, but I am name dropping some of these companies if anybody wants to sponsor me. But I know this is like Day One, and they purchased or acquired like a personal CRM company. So yeah, I just appreciate that it's like in their WordPress world portfolio and has that found.
I think that's great news for a lot of reasons. Also, Pocket Cast interviewed me recently, so I feel like I need to plug that. They sent me to a studio in Midtown and interviewed me for like an hour and a half video, like high quality video, which I'm not used to in this audio space, and put together a few minute long story about my podcast listening journey. I love them and I loved them before that. And I also love that they're independent as a podcast app. Yes, of course, they're part of this larger conglomerate, but they're not the big Apple. They're not the big Spotify. They can make choices as to what they want to put front and center. And they're also very open to independent creators curating segments or sections. They're also very open to independent creators curating within their app. I have also gotten to curate lists within there, and also pitching clients is relatively well received. I just really like what they do.
Nice, nice. So I know you have a bit of work on the Podcast Academy as well. You're on the board, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what that is, and then after we'll look at some of the trends that you want to discuss, and then we'll
Sure. The Podcast Academy started in 2020. It is the podcast industry's response to Hollywood having the Oscars and having these bodies that come together to be resources for the creators within that medium. And I've been a member since 2020 and part of the board of governors since 2022. And I love any attempt at gathering creators and forming community around creators, but also anything that grows the podcast industry is something that I love. I even love video podcasts, just to track back a little bit, because I love the idea that they will expose more people to the word podcast, which will mean eventually when people can't watch video because they're on a road trip, maybe they'll tune into a podcast audio specific app and listen to that. I think overall it raises all tides. And that's why I also love the Podcast Academy, because it wants to raise the tide of creators so that more people can get their podcasts in front of the right people, so that those people can also get their podcasts in front of potential sponsors, so that it's more sustainable for all of these people who are making content independently to have sustainable careers. So the Podcast Academy is great because there's a lot of free events, sometimes for members only and sometimes for the entire community. And they're very open to people pitching classes. So I've taught a lot of classes, and that's a great way to hone your skills as a teacher, but also to get in front of people who need to learn. And they also run the AMBIES, which is the Awards for Excellence in Audio. We're working on a new tagline, but that's what it is for now. And that's great because we have people submitting their podcasts from all over the world, sometimes tiny independent productions and sometimes huge productions. We've had amazing people, amazing hosts present at the AMBIES live, and the AMBIES award ceremony is always this glamorous thing, or as glamorous as it can be in the podcast world. I hope it grows over the years. I hope this really reflects maybe what the beginning of the Oscars looked like, and I love being in at the beginning of it. So yeah, I love being in at the beginning of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really cool wave of, that we've seen the consolidation on the platform side and the company side, but it's like the communities coming together. And it's not just about talent agencies and the media deals, right? There's a group of creatives and technologists and people who have stories to tell. And I'm sure they appreciate having that community and some backing and some commonality. So it's really cool what that is happening in that space. So the two parting thoughts. So do you think there's a mega shift here that really bears repeating, or that you think is going to animate the next couple of years? And is there anything I haven't asked yet that you wanted to share with the audience?
There's definitely a shift right now in podcasting in many ways, but I'll just focus on the definition of the word podcasting. It has changed over the years, and it has changed in many ways, but the big one is podcasts now refer to something much larger than the audio only experience. And I alluded to this before, but I used to be very critical of that. I used to say it's not a podcast if it has a video. Come on. It's not a podcast if it doesn't have an RSS feed. That's what makes it a podcast. And if we are going by strict definitions, that is true. But who is ever going by strict definitions in this world where the people are dictating, not the 99% is dictating, not the 1% who made those rules? I think we put those rules in place because it offers us some sort of semblance of a baseline, but ultimately the people are going to take over. And I think that's a good thing. It means that people are invested, they're involved, and hopefully we listen to them. So the mega shift is, I think that we as the 1% of podcast people need to be open to these changing definitions, and you're still allowed to love audio only. You're still allowed to make audio only. And I hope creators don't feel pressured to add video to their routine if they don't want to. There are still people who want to consume audio and audio only, but the definition is changing. It has mega shifted.
Nice,
That's
absolutely.
clippable. I know that's
Yeah,
clippable. And look, I
that's a
speak
good
in
one.
clips now.
Yeah, absolutely. And anything else that you will want to share that you haven't had a chance to share or we haven't discussed?
No, I just think not that you need to keep this on, but maybe you want to. Your questions were great and different, and I get interviewed a lot on podcasts. And what I really appreciate about an interviewer is when they make me go outside of my normal talking points, because it's very easy for me to start answering a question and fall into this flow that I've shared many times before. But I love the challenge of improving a response and also digging into my brain and getting me to think and then coming up with something that might inform my clients or might inform how I think about consumption. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to take a cut on that Earbuds.Audio brand
Yes.
change. No, just
Yes.
kidding. Yeah, no, it's really great to reconnect, and I appreciate the compliment, and hopefully viewers learned something today, or listeners, of course,
That's right.
learned something today about podcasting and what this field has become, is becoming, is changing. Really appreciate having Arielle Nissenblatt today on Megashift, and you heard it here first, folks. So take care. Thank you. See you next time on Megashift.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.